Want to do better? Then it's time to change the story. Welcome to our show about new visions currently transforming the world through the confluence of art, tech, and innovation. And now your hosts, Michael Ashley and Neil Sahota.
Hey, welcome everybody. I'm pleased to announce our guest for this episode, Russ Charvonia. Russ has worked in the financial services industry since 1980. He's a co-founder of the Channel Islands Group, providing financial and wealth management advice to individual and business clients. He is also well-versed in law, earning his Juris doctorate degree from Ventura College of Law in 2003, and was admitted to the California Bar in 2004. He's also the founder of the Channel Islands Law Group in Ventura, which specializes in estate and charitable gift planning. Russ also has a meditation practice where he helps parties identify and craft creative solutions to difficult problems. He's quite the Renaissance man because he also volunteers his professional services to several nonprofit organizations in his community, and also served as the Grand Master of Masons of California from 2014 to 2015, serving more than 50,000 members. Let's welcome Russ to the show.
Thank you, Neil. I'm tired of listening to that, frankly.
Well, we're glad to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here. We'd like to ask you, as a visionary, what is the story that you want to bring to the world?
I'll tell you, my vision is to return to a truly civil society, one where we're able to have respectful, dignified, and productive, and dare I even say, rewarding discussions with people who hold different opinions about difficult but important subjects. We get there, I think it'd be a good world again.
I very much agree. And I think there's a huge sense of urgency in the moment we're living through right now with this crisis that's unfolding. And I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of how we could be, first of all, more civil during this crisis, and what can we do together to come together to solve some of these challenges in a civil way?
I've been asking myself this question a lot of late, Michael, and I find myself going back to post 9/11, where as a country, we seemed to really come back together. We knew what we were up against. We bonded together to accomplish our joint goal, if you will. And to the best of my recollection, that seemed to last for about 6 or 9 months. And then we ended up going back into our camps, if you will. And at the beginning of this pandemic, I was really, and it's my naivete perhaps, but I was really surprised at how quickly this became a political issue, where I was hoping we would come together to fight this common enemy, if you will. I wasn't seeing it right away. And then we did seem to come together and all be of the same mindset. And now back we're splitting apart again. So to answer your question a little more precisely, I think what we need to do is realize what we have the ability to influence and control. And that is our own behavior, where we can control that. And then where we can have some influence is in our own spheres, our circles, our families, our communities, and so on, and exhibit the kind of behavior and attitudes that we want others to try to emulate.
Well, it's interesting, given that right now we're a lot of sort of shelter in place. We're going through the COVID world, as they say. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of the stories about people fighting over like toilet paper. But I don't feel like we hear enough of the stories. So I know they're happening about people helping each other, like people helping the elderly or the people that are high risk and can't go like buy groceries for themselves. I mean, do you think this could also be an opportunity for civility?
And no question about it, we're seeing more of that than the negative. Of course, the press loves to air the sensational things. But if you look at houses of worship, if you look at all kinds of fraternities, I drove down my street the other day, and a local brew pub was hosting a drive-by, come get a packet of food. So you're seeing more and more of that. Donations to that kind of thing are going through the roof, thank goodness. So there's a lot more good going on than bad. But at the same time, what you are hearing a lot of is domestic violence increasing. You know, people are in tight quarters. They're not getting their respite away from one another. And one of the things that's always troubled me the most is that the people we profess to love the most are the ones we often treat the worst.
Mhm.
And, my pop psychology attitude about it is because it's safe. We can unload, we can be vulnerable with them. And that's the exact opposite of what it should be, in my opinion, that those that we care about are the ones that we should be treating the very best, not a complete stranger.
I completely agree with that, and I think I'm guilty of that sometimes too. Living in close quarters with my family during this time, it can definitely be challenging. Speaking of that word "safe" that you just mentioned a moment ago, someone could say to you, Russ, "Well, yeah, but does civil mean that we just all get along and we suddenly don't have differing opinions? How do you marry the idea of being civil while also allowing for a plurality of different ideas to come forward?"
Very good point. This is an effort I started about 6 years ago. And when we first started it, we spent the first 4 months trying to define the word civility. We thought that was a logical place to start. You read a book and it starts with the definition of the subject matter, of course. And we were having just the toughest time with it. It was like trying to hold sand in your hands. It was just so nebulous. And then after 4 months of this frustrating effort, I did what I should have done at the outset, which was Googled it. And I typed in the word civility into Wikipedia, and it said, "See incivility." And it was one of those aha moments. No wonder we're struggling with it so much. Civility is so much easier to define what it is not than what it is. And since then, I've had so many people say, well, civility is just about being polite and courteous to one another. It's etiquette, if you will. I've had people suggest that it's avoiding difficult conversations with people who have a differing opinion. And then I've had other people say, no, it's none of that. Well, I'm kind of in the middle of this. I don't know how you can engage in civil dialogue with somebody unless there's at least a common level of respect for that other person. You have to have that. And I can give you examples of where I've been in a conversation where that respect just wasn't there. And what I'm going to do in that circumstance is say, I'm sorry, but we can't have a conversation. But for the most part, what true civility is having that level of dignity and respect and concern for your fellow humankind to be able to engage in difficult conversations. That's what makes for a civil society. If we can't have those difficult conversations with people that have a different way of looking at it, then we are not going to advance. And in fact, we're going to go backwards.
Mhm.
I guess I got to ask, like, what's happened to us? Because maybe I'm just being nostalgic, but when I was a kid, I felt like people were a little more open-minded, treated with more courtesy. What happened to us?
I read a book on civility many years ago, and it started the premise with we used to have to get along in close confined spaces. If you think about it, before there was any kind of mass transit, you were in your own community and you had to get along in that small village or town. And then the first form of mass transit was the railroads. And you couldn't be elbowing and pushing and shoving because you were going to be on that rail car for a long, long time. So you had to give that other person the space and the respect and so on. And then fast forward, and then you have air travel and you have subway systems and so on. How do we travel now? Well, not during the time of pandemic, but normally, where are we? We're in our own steel tube or fiberglass tube called an automobile, where we're listening to what we want to listen in terms of music or news or whatever. We don't have anybody else in the vehicle with us more often than not, especially out in the LA area. And so we have distanced ourselves. And just as you said, Neil, I think we've forgotten how to get along with our fellow human.
Ouch, ouch. Look, I'm so shocked when I'm traveling on a plane. I see somebody like clipping their nails or leave the lavatory a complete mess. I'm like, you wouldn't do this in your own home,
Maybe they would.
But that's a really good point, Russ. And I've heard people say obviously this is a horrific crisis. This is terrible. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that there may be other challenges to come. There could be another pandemic. There could be all kinds of horrible things on the horizon. Not to think about bad stuff, but I mean, with climate change, I've heard it said that we could be looking at some incredible things happening right now that this is a dress rehearsal for. How can we use this moment right now to prepare for that? How can we become a more civil country, a more civil world, so that we can be prepared for other challenges to come?
I think you're right, Michael, in that this is going to be expensive tuition if nothing positive comes out of this. I mean, we've shut down economies across the globe, for crying out loud. People are really hurting. And it's one thing to say we're doing it to end the pandemic, but we better be gaining a whole lot more out of this for it to have been worth the cost to it. So what I hope is that we will all take some time to become more introspective than we otherwise might have been. Let's face it, we do have more downtime. Let's take advantage of it. Let's do some reading. Let's do some meditation. Let's just contemplate the kind of person that we want to be and the kind of society we want to create. I think a fear of what, at least that I have of this pandemic, is that it seems to just be happening to us and we're victims in it. No, you can't see being able to take control of a pandemic that's affecting so much of the population, but we can. Mm-hmm. We can. And the more we take this time to grow personally, the more we take the time to try to influence those around us, the good that will come out of this, and that will be tuition well paid.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because my friend Stephen Kotler always talks about neurobiology and flow, and he always says that one of the best and longest lasting natural highs is actually a person helping another person. And if you do it often enough, you really kind of sustain that. And we always talk about, there are people fighting over toilet paper, but maybe this might be an opportunity to build that into the community, this helping each other and being civil. How do we do that? Because I look around and most people I know, they're adhering to shelter in place, doing the good things. The small percentage of people that are running off to the beaches or the parks or something like that, and unfortunately making it potentially worse for everybody else.
Well, first of all, we have to all realize that the only person whose behavior we have any control over is our own. And so it starts with how we are acting. That's first and foremost. This whole civility effort, trying to restore civility to society, in my mind, is more grassroots, from the bottom up. Because guess what? We're not going to change Washington, D.C. We're not going to change Sacramento. We will over the long haul with our votes, of course, but it's up to us. And so I am constantly looking for opportunities where I can influence those within my sphere. Be it my local community, be it my house of worship, be it my Masonic lodge, whatever the case is, that's where I try to share and learn from others as far as how to improve as an individual.
So when I think about incivility, what comes to mind is what's going on social media and online. And I think that there is a tendency, unfortunately, to use the anonymity sometimes of being online, and also the fact that you talked about earlier, we're not in an enclosed space, we're online. And so we feel sometimes safe to say things that we might not otherwise say if we were in person. What are your recommendations in terms of how to have more civil discourses online, especially through social media?
So the first thing is choose your battles. Not everything needs to be addressed. Not everything needs to be countered. And so I would encourage you to, if a conversation's going someplace that you just don't think you can have any influence over and it's not going to be healthy for you, leave it. Leave it. We can't fix the entire world. We can only fix certain things about it. The second thought is that if this is people that you do have a relationship with, find a way to talk with them offline, separately about it, and try to whisper some good counsel in their ear. There's an adage out there that you praise publicly and admonish privately. Mm-hmm. And I think we're doing too little praising in general, especially publicly. And we're not at all afraid to admonish very publicly. And that's what's turning it upside down very, very quickly. So again, if this is somebody that you have a relationship with, call him or her up and say, hey, can I share something with you that was troubling to me? And then, of course, our words matter a lot. How you approach that has everything to do with it. If you come at that person, say, how dare you? Or you even give them that impression that that's how you're coming at them and that's how they're hearing it, it's not going to be a productive conversation. So if you talk in terms of how you interpreted it, how it felt to you, and then ask permission to give some suggestions and guidance. And if they say, no, I really don't care to have it, then that's the end of the conversation. But when you ask somebody permission to share better ways of doing things, you'll tend to find that they're more susceptible, they're more open to it. And then you can have a dialogue that may end up being fruitful.
Makes sense, right? I always hear about you want to have a difficult conversation with someone, don't say you, say I, right? Like I feel, I believe. And I get that, but you got me thinking, Russ. I like to think that I'm a pretty civil guy, but maybe I'm not that civil after all. How do I kind of make that leap and figure out, am I really being civil or not?
Well, Neil, you just said something that is so profound and yet so simple. I should reverse that. So simple and yet so profound that just changing how you talk in terms of you, which is accusatory, well, you said, well, you think, to I think, I feel, I believe, changes the entire tone of a conversation. And if you think about how profound that is, the only point of truth that you can speak from is your own perspective. I don't know what you're thinking, Neil. So that is one simple way. In terms of questioning your own level of civility, I'm grateful for that, because that's the very first step, is being more self-aware. You can imagine doing this for 6 years and talking about it and so on, how people are just ready to jump on me anytime they think that I've been uncivil. And frankly, that level of accountability I appreciate. It just keeps me that much more aware that the eyes of others are on me. And when I blow it, I try really hard to fess up to it, which isn't easy. But to admit when I've made a mistake, and if I've wronged somebody, I do my best to atone for it, to apologize for it. And apologizing in and of itself is frankly an art. An apology is not, I'm sorry you took it that way. An apology is, I am sorry for the hurt that I caused you by doing this act. And that's the first step, and that's a meaningful, important step. But in my opinion, when we have hurt somebody, when we've harmed them, we need to go the next step, which is to do what we need to do to repair the relationship, to return it back to health again. And we don't always know what that's going to be. We can surmise like crazy, but there's nothing wrong with me saying, Michael, I think I've hurt you. And for that, I'm greatly sorry. I'm not sure what I can do to make this right with you again. What thoughts do you have? And I don't think we're doing enough of that. I'm not saying we should be apologizing for everything in the world and walking on eggshells, not by any stretch. But there are times we legitimately hurt somebody, and let's make it right with them.
Absolutely. So how do we get this idea to our children? How do we get young people to think this way?
For those of you that are parents and grandparents, I think you'll agree with me that our children learn far more from what they witness us doing than anything we could ever tell them. And if you want an example of this, if you have a 15 or 16-year-old new driver in your household, first of all, my prayers for you. But secondly, you can, and I'm sure you have told them a bunch of times, don't text and drive. And that will sink into them until the very minute that they get in the car with you and you open your phone and you answer a text. That just destroyed everything you told them about not texting and driving. So my point of this, of course, is that be cognizant of the behavior you're exhibiting, because that's going to speak a whole lot louder than any words that you can share with them. The other thing is, I'm of the belief that people are born with good hearts and that they want to do the right things. Yeah, if you have a 3-year-old at home, he or she is trying to figure out where those boundaries are. I get that. But they still want to do the right thing. And so we need to enable them to do that. My wife, who has to be the best parent I've ever witnessed, told our daughter at every occasion, help me to find a way to be able to say yes to you. She empowered our daughter to make good decisions. And yet we let her fail at times. Because if you're not failing, you're not learning. So, but always providing that safety net so that if she falls, she's not going to fall too terribly hard.
I think that's really powerful, and I think we lose sight that failure is okay, right? Sometimes failure is actually okay, create learning opportunity. But I'm also wondering, we live in such a ultra sensitive society now where you get nitpicked for small things. Do you think that fear of failure or failing publicly is maybe driving some of the incivility going on, or maybe impeding us from being more civil?
I think you're probably on the right track with that, Neil. I'm going to take it a little different way, if I may, and that is, I think we are oftentimes too worried about saving face, too worried about being wrong, or too worried about being right, as the case may be. And if you think about the world, it isn't as black and white as we often make it out to be. It's rarely somebody is entirely right and somebody else is entirely wrong. And the more we're able to have these conversations, the more we might be able to realize that there are relatively few absolute truths in this universe.
Mhm.
And things that we refer to as an absolute truth, like our religious truths, in my opinion, and I may make somebody mad here, but in my opinion, these are more deep-seated beliefs. It's my truth, but it's not necessarily a universal truth. We can take this back to the time when the truth was that the earth was flat. That wasn't just a belief, that was the truth. Or that the sun revolved around the earth. Okay? If you talk to people back in those times, that was the truth. So, what do we consider to be a truth now that at some point down the road might be proven either not entirely true or not true at all? So, let's try to differentiate in our own minds what is a deeply held belief. And I don't want to put that down in anybody at all, because that's what makes this world, it's the cornerstone to this world, is our deeply held beliefs. But let's be willing to realize that, you know what, there may be another way of looking at this. And my truth may not be 100% accurate. And if I can go on just another step of that, part of that is, we tend to draw this line in the sand. And once we allow ourselves to do that, it's very hard to go back against it. So if you can picture sand and the wave comes up and it washes that line away, or at least makes it a little more variable, if you will. We need to make it safe for other people to be able to back away from that line that they've drawn.
Mm-hmm.
Back to our words matter. So don't hold their feet to fire. Well, what you said was, it's okay to allow somebody to change their minds. Guess what? Even our politicians, which of course, if they change their mind, we label them a flip-flopper, and it's the worst thing in the world that they can ever do. This pandemic is a great example of that. Nobody knew how bad this was going to be. We're right now coming up on 60,000 US deaths. Who can tell any of us exactly how many lives will be lost in the United States? None of us. Might it stop in this next week? Might it be double or triple, God forbid? Okay. So the medical professionals that were predicting, 100,000 lives or 10,000 lives or whatever, let's presume decency in these people, which is one more concept. And I know I'm going on a lot here, but obviously I'm pretty passionate about this. We all judge people instantaneously and very subconsciously. We meet somebody for the first time, we are judging him or her by how they look, by the style of their hair, what they're wearing, the color of their skin, their accents, so on and so forth. And that's innate in us as Homo sapiens. That's what has kept us alive as a species for all these millennia, because we knew whether we need to flee from this threat or go to this warm person and offer a handshake or a hug. But I want to suggest that those of your listeners who are still with us try to flip that on its head and presume that everybody with whom they come in contact is actually a decent person, a well-meaning, good-hearted person. Occasionally, we're going to be proven wrong. There are jerks out there, I'll grant that. But I would rather be proven wrong on occasion than assume everybody out there is a jerk and be proven wrong most of the time, because most people are not. So if we can have that presumption of decency in other people, even our elected officials, who may just be going about doing things in a different way than we would, but they still have our best intentions in mind. Occasionally there's going to be that politician that was corrupt or what have you. But for the most part, these are public servants that are trying to do the best they can with what they have.
I very much agree with you, and want to thank you for coming in on our show and talking about these things. How can people find out more about what you're doing and get in touch with you?
We are operating all of this under the Worldwide Civility Council. So if you go to info@civilitycouncil.org, info@civilitycouncil.org, that email will come directly to me, and I would be happy to try to point you in the right direction.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks, Russ.
Thank you again,
gentlemen. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
Hey, if you like today's show, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment.
If you've been enjoying the Changing the Story podcast series, please subscribe and share it with your friends.
Thank you.